Good morning. My name is Carika Middelberg and I'm an analyst at the CRA. Today we are joined by Chris Hattingh, our CRA Executive Director, to discuss the latest results of the Northwest University Policy Uncertain Index released for the first quarter. So, Chris, can you please tell us more about the results of this policy index and what this indicates about South Africa's current economic circumstances?
Thanks very much, Carika. It does feel quite odd to be on this side of the lens of the interview, as it were. So it does take some getting used to, but I appreciate the opportunity. So the Northwest University and Northwest University Business School, specifically index for the first quarter of this year, the score or the reading for that survey came in at 78.6, and that is a worsening from the 65.7 that was recorded in the fourth quarter of 2024. So the further away from 50 or zero that you move into quote unquote negative territory, that indicates more uncertainty. Now, this was largely driven, according to a press release around the index and the latest iteration. This is because of various local and global risks. Now, that's of course not specific enough. So when we talk local, we talk things like heading into the budget. So because this was conducted in the first quarter of this year, this has been the budget quarter, and we had the postponement of the national budget for the first time in South Africa's democratic history, of course, by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, when the two main parties in the GNU couldn't reach agreement on the first iteration of the budget. And of course, now last week, they couldn't reach agreement on the latest iteration of the budget, where the Democratic Alliance did not vote in favor of the fiscal framework in the National Assembly, and the ANC had to get other parties such as Action SA, bolster, one or two others, to vote for the fiscal framework to now be passed. So that's in terms of domestic policy uncertainty. And internationally, we have the second administration of Donald Trump, of course, president in the US, driving global uncertainty in terms of his policy domestically for the US, but especially internationally. In the last week, at the time of recording, we had the first opening salvo for President Trump in terms of his tariffs, universal and reciprocal tariffs that he put on imports and goods coming into the US. That is causing a lot of anxiety in terms of global markets, where investors, businesses, trading partners of the US are uncertain as to whether these tariffs are final or not. Is there room for negotiation? How are things going to be settled at the end of the day? All of that just elevates the uncertainty around doing business, around also possibly the cost of doing business. It doesn't mean it's always going to be like that, but there's just a lot of movement in terms of the local and global policy space at this point in time.
Great. So, if we focus a bit more on local policy uncertainties, especially around the budget, how do you think business would respond in terms of this? I am aware that business has written a letter to the GNU, more specifically the DA and the ANC, to encourage these two partners to find a way to make the GNU work. So, if we look at it from that angle, how do you think the policy index accounted for that? And do you think it's might be a recurring problem that we face going into the future, especially if these two parties cannot find a way or mitigate or find an agreement?
It will, in all likelihood, continue to be a feature, which is also why businesses, citizens in South Africa need to get used to this idea of coalition government. It is sort of built in that there are going to be rooms and areas of spaces of uncertainty and more disagreement, which is why it's important for parties in something like the GNU to focus on building institutions and longer term capacity in the state and civil society that stand up to that sort of more turbulence or those stronger areas of disagreement. So presuming everything remains the same in the GNU, the statement of intent, everything around how the ANC constituted the cabinet, the role that the DA thinks it should be playing and tries to play, that other parties think they should try to play, the spaces they think they should occupy. If all of that remains the same at the time of recording and now going forward for the short term, there will be more volatility and more uncertainty. There might be, the GNU might reach the brink again, and you'll have lots of public statements flying between the entities. Just this morning, again, as we record on the 7th of April, Deputy President Paul Mashatile expressed his views on the GNU, where he indicated that he finds it difficult to understand from his point of view, and that's putting it diplomatically, how DA ministers could remain as ministers if their party didn't support the fiscal framework, didn't support the budget. So there'll be different players in different parties trying to put pressure on each other to increase the uncertainty, to get a party to leave. They're trying to play it up for their own sort of long-term benefits and for their party. So again, as I say, assuming everything remains the same, this is not assuming there's a new statement of intent, assuming there's no new agreement between the two major parties in the GNU, policy uncertainty will remain elevated. Just a last point on this, that then filters into how government actually implements policy. So business loves policy certainty. Business appreciates when things are more stable. Markets like that sort of thing. We've seen how much the rand has weakened against the dollar over the last week. That is partly due to the higher tariffs that President Trump has implemented, but it's also driven by domestic policy and growth issues, where South Africa's growth picture isn't particularly strong. We had the issues around the budget and the negotiations last week. That drives up South Africa's risk premium, which weakens the rand, especially in the short term against currencies like the dollar. So business, I think, is also trying to figure out how things like the Expropriation Act are going to be implemented, the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. We still have NHI hanging over the fiscus and over the healthcare sector in South Africa. How is that going to be implemented? If you take those major policy and legislative uncertainties, coupled with an uncertain and unstable government, that just elevates the risk for local and international businesses in terms of doing business in South Africa.
Yes. And would you say, considering that you just argued that policy uncertainty will remain if, quote unquote, nothing changes and the GNU stays the same, do you think a better route would be for if the GNU, let's say, disbands and the ANC leaves, and let's say, especially if we consider the parties that voted for the budget, like Action SA or the IFP, bolster, do you think that would be a bit more stable if the, let's say, the GNU disbands and other parties join, or there's another concession model? What do you think would be an alternative route for more policy stability?
I think the focus should be on the policies themselves. So making sure that policies are reformed, current ones, and new ones that are implemented are fit for purpose. And what I mean by fit for purpose is policies that protect the rule of law, that strengthen property rights, and that drive economic growth higher. Because ideally, those policies, they can't control the global environment. They can't control all the politics in a coalition government at a national level. But they do then lay more of a stable ground sort of base or framework for the country to use going forward. So investors, markets, they have more confidence in the broader policy space, that it is conducive to doing business and is conducive to the formation of capital in the country. We often refer to the gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP. South Africa has a target of 30% gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP. And the only point where we ever reached that was around 2008, 2009 in the lead up to the Soccer World Cup, when we got around 15%. For an emerging market, we should be around 25 to 30%. So it shows you, if it's so low that every year, around 12, 13, 14%, there isn't that long-term certainty in South Africa as an investment destination, because often the policies, even when there's certainty, we know the Expropriation Act is law now. It's been signed. There's certainty in that regard, but it's not the right policy or the right piece of legislation that South Africa needs. So it's also to keep that in mind. I think just on the GNU broadly, if a party like the DA leaves, it does expose the ANC and President Ramaphosa, especially because they won't have as many votes as they had in parliament with the DA in the GNU. So it exposes the ANC and the president to motions of no confidence. They need to try and, at every issue, whether it's a budget or not, they need to get support from different parties, which is uncertain and unpredictable. That then feeds into, again, heightened uncertainty around governance in the country, never mind policy. So there's an argument to be made. Maybe if the DA leaves and there isn't that strong ideological disagreement between the ANC and the DA, a GNU of a new sort would be more stable. But that needs to take into account just the strong personalities that we have in many political parties in the country. And just because they might then see ideologically things the same, that doesn't mean from a management or governance point of view, they would agree day to day in terms of running a national coalition. So for the time being, South Africa can set things up in its own favor by implementing the right policies, and then still trying to deal with the long-term uncertainty of whatever coalition it's going to be, because I do think South Africa's future is coalition government.
Yes, I think considering both your arguments, it would be safe to say that we are currently in a precarious position. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Much appreciated, and have a good day for the viewers.